So the MBA team behind me, I'll leave it to them to introduce themselves, but I've been working with them rather closely, and they have been such a pleasure to work with. They've done a lot of hard work. They've gone to different nonprofits and land developers and stakeholders, and they've done some really good work. And so I'm going to leave it to them to expand on that.
My name is Fiona. Up here with me tonight is Heather, Axel, Sarah, Scott, and Dave. The six of us are Masters of Business students at Wilfrid Laurier University. And as Rianne and Father Toby briefly mentioned, we started this project 6 months ago alongside the parish. And given our diverse backgrounds, we're actually part-time students, so we're working full-time as well. I think we bring a unique perspective to this final report and recommendation, kind of look at things from a different viewpoint, which I think is very beneficial. So before we really dive in, I want to give you guys some background as to what's been going on over the past 6 months. So the project started back in January, which is just simply the project identification. Our first meeting with the parish occurred early on in February, and as a result of that meeting, we were tasked specifically to identify a target beneficiary group that would benefit from a potential affordable housing project from the parish. We divided our work into 4 phases from there. Phase 1 was a research phase. We collected data from secondary sources. These sources included mainly Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, the federal government, Statistics Canada, and Regional Waterloo, to name a few. From there, we entered phase 2, which was an expert and stakeholder consultation phase. And again, Rianne mentioned it briefly. We met with several stakeholders within the region, and actually outside of Ontario for that matter, who were either local developers, members of not-for-profit organizations, or they may have just been involved with a similar project. These experts, as we call them, gave us a lot of information regarding potential benefactors of this project and also how to go about pursuing a project such as this. From there, we collected our data, compiled the data, and identified a target group and began to develop our final recommendation. And today we are here to present to you the findings from our data gathering and give some of you have our final report as we handed it to the parish earlier last week. And I'd like to note that this really couldn't come at a better time, just given the recent news by the City of Kitchener that they just announced that a formal affordable housing strategy will be pursued within the next couple of years. In addition, with the ION opening, there was recent news that the poor population is being pushed out of the downtown core. So I really don't think that this project, specifically given its location, could have come at a better time, and it opens up a lot of opportunities for the parish in that regard. So as we move along, we're going to start within the presentation. We're going to start with the problem identification and give you an overview of affordable housing and the needs locally and nationally. We're going to identify the vulnerable groups that we identified within the research and provide you with our recommendation and support for why we're recommending targeting that specific benefactor for a potential affordable housing project. We'll provide an overview of risks and mitigations, and after we conclude our presentation, we will open up the floor to questions. So to begin, I would like to hand things off to Heather to start with the problem identification of this project.
Perfect. Thanks, Fiona. So as you can see here, essentially after our first meeting, we were kind of thinking and putting our heads together and essentially identified the issue here, how St. Mary's can best utilize its vacant plot of land to better serve the community in which it resides in downtown Kitchener and the region of Waterloo as a whole, and more specifically to support the most vulnerable population in this area. One of the things that we used to guide some of our research, as well as kind of including some of the stakeholder preferences for the assignment, was to look and read through Laudato Si, and wanted to highlight one of the key and highlighted areas in the excerpt that you'll see above. As Fiona had mentioned, we were looking kind of at how the vacant plot of land and how the project could positively impact the community and essentially the most vulnerable populations within the community. And it was really important for us to highlight that in this excerpt you can see an appreciation of the immense dignity of the poor. So to highlight our recommendation, we recommend that the plot of land be used for an affordable housing project that's targeted towards seniors and encompasses both affordable as well as market rate housing, which we will go into describing in greater detail later on in the presentation. To go over a few key definitions, statistics, and to essentially set the foundation for what we're going to be describing to you today, wanted to first define affordable housing as the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation defines it, which is housing in Canada is considered affordable if it costs less than 30% of a household's before tax income. Next, wanting to define two of the affordable housing models or housing models in general, the first of which is market rate. So that is typically developer-led, for-profit, and cross-subsidized. Cross-subsidized essentially means that market rate condos and rental units help to cover the cost of affordable housing units within the same property. Non-market or affordable housing is typically not-for-profit or co-op led. They are targeted towards low income, essentially to go in line with the vulnerable population that you are targeting for this project, and are typically subsidized by some group within the community or larger government group. Next, wanted to talk a little bit about the affordable housing landscape. So essentially, that's an analysis of the macro environmental factors that could have an impact on the project. So to break that down in greater detail in terms of the landscape that we're looking at today, there are various factors: political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental. So to highlight a few of the political ramifications, the National Housing Strategy just announced a $40 billion investment in funding for the 10-year period spanning from 2017 to 2027. The Region of Waterloo Affordable Housing Strategy is an investment of $15 million in funds. The City of Kitchener may consider waiving development fees, and the fact that affordable housing is a key priority to the City of Kitchener. Economically, income in lower brackets, so essentially those at lower income streams, is remaining stagnant while the cost of housing is continuing to rise over time. From a social perspective, the Region of Waterloo population is anticipated to grow to a population of 745,000 by 2031. 3,000 households are on the affordable housing waitlist, which we will discuss later on in the project. And it is going to be very important within the potential project, the affordable housing project, that we consider not only stakeholder management, but the importance of creating a sense of community by the project overall. From a technological perspective, there's a few implications, potentially using technology to minimize required operational resources and costs, designing and building the project with potential accessibility in mind, and considering the vulnerable groups' access to technology will be an important consideration as well. There are some legal ramifications, including project eligibility depending on land zoning, some environmental considerations such as water management and energy efficiency, as well as the fact that there aren't anticipated to be too many wildlife displacement issues with this potential build. And it's important to note that environmental code compliance will be important as well. Just to highlight the main two, from a political perspective, available resources and support from municipal as well as national grants and subsidies will be an important consideration. And from a social perspective, the population is aging and the waitlist for affordable housing continues to grow year over year. Next, I will hand it over to Dave, who will talk about affordable housing.
Hello. So the next portion of this presentation mainly focuses on the secondary research that we gathered from various sources, like Fiona said, from StatsCan, CMHC, as well as Regional Waterloo. So to paint a picture, we looked at this as a national issue at first. So regarding this being a national issue, there's rising concern across Canada, particularly in Toronto and Vancouver. So Toronto and Vancouver get a lot of the media attention in terms of housing affordability issues. There's a lot of house price increase in these areas, mainly because of steady immigration, limited development overall, investment speculation especially in those two key markets. And then take a key rental market like Toronto. There's a lack of rental units available overall, and this can be seen in rent price increases. So for instance, a 1-bedroom apartment right now in Toronto has seen a 7.1% year-over-year increase in price, and the average rent right now is $2,150. A 2-bedroom has seen about a 4.1% year-over-year increase, and average rent is about $2,815. So as you can imagine, it's difficult to pay your rent when you have $2,800 in monthly rent. So a government response. So the government actually decided to make this a national issue formally. So there was $40 billion in 2017 dedicated to combating housing issues. The main goals for that $40 billion are to have a 50% reduction in chronic homelessness, 100,000 new rental units built, and 300,000 repaired rental units that already exist. The main goal for the fund is to use the funds to promote diverse communities by building housing that is sustainable, accessible, mixed income, and mixed use. And then of the $40 billion, there's $15.9 billion dedicated to what's called the National Housing Co-Investment Fund. $4.7 billion of that is direct financial contribution, so it's the government actually building projects themselves. And then $11.2 billion of that is dedicated towards projects potentially like this, in the form of low-interest loans for public or private loans for projects like this. The remainder of the money was passed on directly to the provinces for their own initiatives. So making this more of a local issue and looking at the landscape here, some fast facts about the region of Waterloo. 10th largest metro within Canada. Its population is 583,500 residents, according to the latest census. It's expected to grow to 742,000 residents by 2031. The senior population right now is expected to double by 2031. There's currently about 63,000 seniors within the area, and it's expected to go to about 129,000. Also, there's strong demand for housing within the local market, and I'll get into the details of that here. So regarding rental vacancy rate. So for the region of Waterloo, the past 5 years are graphed out behind me. As you can see, all of the past 5 years have been below 3%, and 3% for rental vacancy rate is kind of a key benchmark. Anything below 3% is considered a highly competitive market for rent. And then 3% and above is a little bit more on the healthy side in terms of a market. So there's been strong demand for rental units, and supply has simply not kept pace. And although one thing we wanted to note was that in 2018, you can see an uptick, and that was 1,600 new rental units that were developed that year. So those 1,600 units did help the situation slightly in the last year. Another interesting fact about senior rental vacancy. So as you can see the graph on the bottom, senior rental vacancy has decreased the last 5 years in a row, meaning that the competitive for senior rental buildings in particular are becoming more competitive. It's not an immediate issue right now at 10%, but it's trending down and is certainly in that direction. There's only going to be more and more seniors looking to get out of maybe single-family homes and into less kind of maintenance-demanding living accommodations. So demand is simply outpacing supply. In terms of the regional Waterloo rental market, what's graphed here is the rent. On the far left is the rent in 2003, followed by the rent in 2012, and then rent in 2018, or I should say average rent. And then we have bachelor apartments, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom. The one key point here I want to point out is that you can see from basically the steepness of the line from 2003 to 2012 is far less steep than from 2012 to 2018. And the reasoning for that is that from 2012 to 2018, bachelors had a 36% increase. 1-bedroom rent saw a 56% increase. 2-bedroom rent, a 63% increase. and 3-bedroom rent saw a 29% increase. So obviously when you have a situation where you're seeing from 2012 to 2018 a 63% average rent increase within the region of Waterloo, you can see a serious issue here. Regarding the actual real estate market within the region, in 2001 the average house price was about $185,000. In 2011 it was about $353,000, and then more recently last year's average sale price was $575,400. So single family home prices continue to rise. The region is growing in size, like I said before, and we're also seeing a lot of Toronto expats, well, I'll call them. So a lot of people fleeing Toronto, cashing out there, and potentially coming. So the real estate market's seeing an effect from that, and demand is simply outpacing supply. April 2019, so not too long ago, one thing that was in the paper was that the region of Waterloo actually saw the highest single month average sale price recorded ever. So in April, there was $611,800 average home sale price. So it's houses are getting quite expensive. And then another thing that could further the problem is interest rates in the last month or so have started to go down. So as interest rates go down, buying power becomes a little bit more strong, and we could see further demand for housing. So regarding the region of Waterloo affordable housing options, so what's currently available? In total, there's 9,000 units, rental units currently out there. Most of them come from co-op and not nonprofit sector partners, so about 4,300 or so. The second largest group is Waterloo Region Housing that they've built themselves. There's about 2,700 units. There's new units under the affordable housing strategy for the region of Waterloo. And this was an initiative that started in 2001. And they've been able to, as of this, rental units have about 1,500. But they've also had additional units kind of mixed into this graph, but it's actually closer to about 2,000 now. And then the last option is rent supplement units. So what this means is basically municipalities are allowing people to have rental units within their houses, such as a basement apartment. And they're willing to give you a loan up to $25,000 to make it a legal apartment. But this option just kind of hasn't taken off because the agreement for the loan is that you have to have below market rent for 25 years. So that's a rather long commitment. And just to put it in perspective, there's only been, in 2018, one of the articles for the local paper was saying that there's only been about 100 people that signed up for this. So it's clearly not working. The Region of Waterloo Housing Access List, this is a very important factor that St. Mary's must consider. Residents can apply for housing through the Region of Waterloo Community Access Housing Center. The list is managed by the Region of Waterloo, and applicants are vetted by the Region of Waterloo. Strict income limits, refugee status, criminal record, and previous rental debts. So essentially the tenant has to be in good standing on all of those key aspects in order to be able to qualify for this. And then applicant profiles are available for review. So a key point here is that St. Mary's could actually have a say in tenant selection for their project, which is, in my opinion, it was surprising when I read that. And another key point here is that more than 4,000 people are on this list currently, as of the latest numbers. And this translates to about a several-year wait for people that are signing up for this. So demand is very high for affordable housing. I'll pass this on to Sarah to go over our vulnerable groups that we study now.
Okay, so the National Housing Strategy, as well as the Region of Waterloo, identified several vulnerable groups in need of affordable housing within Canada. So of those vulnerable groups, which we have here on the screen, both the National Housing Strategy and Region of Waterloo identified off-reserve Aboriginals, new immigrants, disabled individuals, and seniors as vulnerable groups in Canada. So I'm going to go over those 4 groups specifically into a little bit more detail. So starting with Aboriginals, so the term Aboriginal applies to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis individuals living in Canada. So in 2011, 62% of Aboriginals actually lived off reserve, and they face unique challenges, including higher unemployment rate, increased dependency on social assistance programs, and they're less likely than non-Aboriginals to be able to attain post-secondary education. So to improve housing within this group, the federal government implemented the Investment for Affordable Housing in Ontario, as well as additional funding and programs. And because so many of these programs were already in place, we decided not to focus on this specific group when it came to St. Mary's. So that brings us to disabled individuals. So this group includes any individuals with physical, mental, or intellectual disabilities that may impact their ability to function or live independently. So of course, within this group, there's going to be great variability in the extent of disabilities, but overall, disabled individuals are less likely to be educated, and they're more likely to experience difficulty when they're obtaining or maintaining employment, and then this has a negative impact then on their ability to find housing. So the unique challenge with this group is that many of them are better suited for supportive housing. So supportive housing actually offers assistance beyond what affordable housing would, so such as medical care or meal preparation. So we felt like supportive housing fell out of the scope of this project because that would require St. Mary's to hire a full staff, and you'd be looking at up to 24 hours of care per day. So then moving on to new immigrants. So approximately 296,000 new immigrants were welcomed into Canada in 2016 alone, with the majority of them coming for business or employment opportunities. So there are already several agencies in place that assist new immigrants with connecting them with social assistance programs, language and healthcare programs, as well as helping them to find temporary housing. So we found that the majority of new immigrants that utilized affordable housing did so on a temporary or short-term basis, and that wasn't really a fit for this project, so that's why we didn't focus on them for St. Mary's as well. So that brings us to our last group, which is seniors. So seniors include any individuals aged 65 or older. Overall, the number of seniors continues to increase because of increases in life expectancy and also improvements in healthcare. So it's estimated that by 2031, 1 in 5 region of Waterloo residents will be seniors. And through our research, we found there were several different challenges that this group faced. So I'll go over the main 3. So the first issue we found is associated with low income. So a 2018 survey showed that 40% of Canadians do need to rely on some form of government assistance just to pay for basic necessities during their retirement. And this issue is assumed to become more problematic as life expectancy continues to increase. So the second are health issues. So seniors are more at risk for physical and or cognitive impairments, and then this overall would impact their well-being. Through our research, we found that there's actually been studies that have shown that a shared living arrangement or affordable housing structure actually benefits the health of seniors, and it's shown to be positively associated with improvement to health. Then the third reason is associated with the first two, and that's social isolation. So to help deal with this isolation, we're focused on the building design should be focused on the community-based by creating gathering spaces both inside and outside of the building. So overall, by providing more affordable housing catered towards seniors and then focusing on that community lifestyle, we can help to reduce the impacts that some of these individuals are dealing with. So now I'll pass it on to Axel, who will go over our recommendation in more detail.
So just to go over our recommendation, so as Heather mentioned, it is recommended that the plot of land be used for an affordable housing project that is targeted towards seniors and encompasses both affordable and market rate housing. I just wanted to discuss the decision criteria used to come up with that recommendation. So while multiple groups were considered, the senior population best satisfies the decision criteria developed to determine suitability. Their criteria included a large and growing need in the region of Waterloo, the operational resources required, funding availability, stakeholder preferences, and how frequently the group was mentioned in our stakeholder consultations. We put the highest 3 on the PowerPoint, but all 6 groups were considered. Starting with the large population in the region of Waterloo. So seniors currently represent 14% of the region's population, and as Dave mentioned, this population is expected to double by 2031. And then from 2011 to 2017, the average waiting time for seniors in search of community housing increased from 1.3 years to 3 years, which was the greatest increase of any group in the study. Operation resources required are considered to be relatively low for an independent senior population compared to some of the other groups. And we do feel that St. Mary's is well positioned to support this group given their downtown location, proximity to local transit, and proximity to community services and employment and volunteer opportunities as well. Funding availability, so seniors are considered a priority group in the National Housing Strategy, so there should be no concerns getting government funding should that be the route St. Mary's decides to go. Stakeholder preferences, so it's assumed that providing affordable housing to seniors would be a natural fit for St. Mary's given the aging congregation and operational resources available. And then mentioned in interviews, so 12 out of the 12 interviews conducted, seniors were mentioned 5 times. This was the most out of any group mentioned. In addition, they were also highlighted as a logical group for St. Mary's to support given St. Mary's resources. So I'll now pass it over to Scott to talk about the social benefits of the project.
Thank you. So when we look at this, some of the lines didn't show up, but basically what we have here in this picture is a lot of the relationships between affordability issues, how it can impact health, social and economic inequities. And this is something that really inspired us through the project. And the reason is because if you are able to help with the affordability needs of any individual, you're going to have a far-reaching impact on other aspects of their life. So what we mean by that is offering affordable housing to these individuals is going to offer them time, it's going to minimize their daily stresses, give them opportunities to benefit themselves in other ways, decrease the opportunities for mental and physical health issues, and overall offer them a stronger quality of life. So that was something that was really inspiring. Now what further got us inspired to choose the senior-specific group is because they run into the opportunity for further issues towards the end of their life due to isolation reasons. And the risks here, because generally they have less time with their family or friends, limited access to transportation, they're generally living alone, and these critical life transitions can be really, really tough in isolation. So as Axel mentioned, pairing with the St. Mary's here offers opportunities to give back or volunteer, and this can really help with their sense of self-worth, new friends and people going through the same sort of life transitions as themselves, and again, downtown core access to get transportation or other needs. So that is on the kind of qualitative side that really inspired us. And because we can't really avoid it and we're MBA students, I'm going to get into some of the quantitative. First thing to think of is funding and high-level funding. So sort of how are you going to pay for this project? We've got 4 sort of high-level areas, and the first one is 100% self-funded. This would be ideal. Pros is you have full control of your project, speed, no one can tell you what to do or how to dictate it. However, development projects, as Ron could probably vouch, are quite expensive. Now, there's a mix of self and bank loan, and again, this offers a lot of the opportunity to remain in full control, oversee your project, and do it how you would like to. It carries loan interest, and again, there's a little more scrutiny when it comes to funding, but most of the pros still remain. There are government partnerships and initiatives, so this can minimize your costs. There is development cost grants that can be gifted as long as the project remains sustainable for a certain amount of time. There's increased scrutiny and audits as well as other barriers that this can bring with it. And there's also the opportunity for the government to pay up to 60% of all affordable unit costs moving forward. So there's a lot of opportunities for funding here, and especially for the senior population. However, there's a lot of barriers and kind of hoops to jump through, definitely a slowed down speed time. So that's a very important consideration. And the last one is not-for-profit partnerships. I don't think in our stakeholder interviews this was recommended a lot, and the reason being is once you are partnered fully with a not-for-profit group, it takes away your flexibility with the way you want to run your project, and it'll have to fit under their umbrella as well. So a last quick important point, and it really emphasizes the choices in the last slide, is that I built a financial model that's in the appendices of the presentation and books there. But basically what it says is any of those opportunities have the ability to be self-sustaining and cash flow positive. So this puts an emphasis on your qualitative ways, but we used a 6-story, 50-unit example, 20% affordable units, which through stakeholder interviews was the highest of any self-sustaining not-for-profit group in the region. And the no land acquisition cost really benefits this. But regardless of what opportunity you choose, there's a positive investment rate of return. And another thing to really take into consideration is a potential gifting of a grant through the government loan process. But otherwise, regardless how you choose, take into consideration your time and how much control you want, and don't necessarily worry because the numbers can work themselves out. I'm going to pass it back to Sarah to come back up.
Okay, so during our interviews with our stakeholders, one of the things we asked them was to define success or describe what their key success factors were. And we received a variety of different responses. The responses we received were usually pretty typical and consistent with the group that they were helping. So for example, if we have a supportive housing facility that's helping substance abusers, success to them would be having drug-free or healthy tenants. Whereas if you look at a house that focuses on disabled individuals, for them success might be having those tenants being able to live relatively independently. So although the responses were unique, one common theme that emerged was creating a sustainable community for the tenants, and that's our hope for this project as well. So for St. Mary's Parish, this project will be considered to be successful if there's diversity among the tenants, that low-income seniors are placed into affordable housing units, and that the creation of sustainable community does exist and then continues to grow from there. So now I'll pass it on to Fiona, who's going to go over some potential project risks.
Our paper does outline several potential risks, but I just want to go over three risks that we see as having a high probability and potentially high impact on the project itself. So first and foremost is community buy-in. So you want to get your neighbors on board with this project, not only to have it thrive upon completion, but just to get it off the ground. And that goes hand in hand with political buy-in as well. You know, you need to mitigate any issues with neighbors not being open to the idea is have information sessions, really emphasize and outline the benefits that this project can have on the surrounding community, and just raise awareness through meetings or volunteer opportunities, just any way to get those benefits of the project out there. Next is tenant eviction. Unfortunately, this is a reality. Evictions are going to happen, and you may be left with carrying the cost of a unit for several months, and there may be damage to that unit once a tenant is potentially evicted. So always budget with worst case scenario in mind. Make sure you have enough funds to carry or capital to carry that unit throughout the eviction process. Become familiar with the process. And lastly, as we mentioned with the community care or the community housing access list, you do have the flexibility to be picky or choosy about who you let into your units. So I think it's really important to have a pretty thorough interview process with your potential tenants and make sure you find the right landlord-tenant fit from the very beginning, and I think this will really help to reduce any potential issues. And going with tenant eviction, we are focusing on the senior population, and they are at an increased risk of deteriorating health. So there may come a time where they will need to be transitioned from affordable housing to supportive housing. Now, one of our stakeholders mentioned that you could put a clause in the tenancy agreement that references both parties acknowledging when the time comes and you're no longer able to support yourself, you will need to be transitioned. It may be hard to enforce, but it's good to have the open dialogue from the very beginning with that resident. Now, lastly, we keep talking about isolation of tenants. Not only does isolation for seniors affect psychological and cognitive health, but the community suffers a lack of social cohesion. So we keep mentioning creation of community space within the building to promote resident interaction is very important, but also partner with local organizations to create programs and promote participation within the Kitchener community. I know at our last meeting with Father Toby and Rianne, they mentioned partnership with Circle of Friends. These are amazing partnerships to strengthen over time to get your tenants involved in the community. And these volunteer opportunities are immensely important for this population, as seniors aged 65 to 74 contribute the most volunteer hours out of any other group, averaging approximately 231 hours. So that in and of itself will better the surrounding community, and also there's a lot of local not-for-profits right in this downtown core that will potentially benefit from any partnerships that St. Mary's can have in place with them. So to start wrapping things up, I will hand it off to Heather, who will go over property inclusions and considerations and conclude the presentation.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Fiona. So just to cover off quickly some property inclusions and considerations that need to be held in mind as you progress through the project, the first of which is an environmentally friendly design. Secondly, as has been brought up several times throughout the presentation tonight, well thought out community space. This will be very important to help with the final point of social isolation. Finally, I also wanted to talk a little bit about the floor layout. So something unique is that a typical hallway that essentially runs from end to end is not the most facilitative for social isolations and community space. Essentially, if the project is designed with the hallways in the shape of essentially a triangle, if you think about a building that's organized that way, with potentially a courtyard in the middle, or a rectangle, those types of building designs will allow for more interaction between the residents and therefore promote less social isolation than would otherwise exist. In terms of our conclusion, utilizing the vacant plot of land for an affordable housing project, given the location in downtown Kitchener, combined with the parish's passion for social good, provides a great opportunity for this project within this location and for the different stakeholder groups that might be involved. While mainly focusing on having tenants that are low income, the parish is successfully targeting a beneficiary group in which is in need in the region. Other tenants are to be included for diversity reasons, but essentially based on the aforementioned criteria, we think that seniors is probably the most important and most at-need risk within the community. Determining the best beneficiary group is just one layer that you need to consider for the affordable housing project. Additional considerations definitely need to be made, such as potential community partnerships, building design and layout, as well as operational efficiencies that might come to mind. At the end of the project, if diversity exists within the project and low-income seniors are placed into affordable housing units, there is also the creation of community engagement, then the project can be considered a success by St. Mary's Parish. And now I'd like to open up the floor to any questions that you might have. Thank you very much for your time this evening.